Chapter 1. Perhaps this story should not be told. Perhaps some things are better left unsaid. But I ache to tell this story of the strength and passion of a remarkable woman. Indeed, were it not for this woman, I would not be alive today.
Our story begins. No, I mustn't do this, thought Huey Hewitt. He envisioned devastating consequences. Consequences that would befall not only him, but also the lovely 25-year-old woman who sat before him. The year was 1946. On this cold, wintry night in the Upper East Side of Manhattan, a slender man in his late 30s and a beautiful young woman sat in the dimly lit bar of Rayo's Italian restaurant. The spicy aroma of marinara sauce filled the air as an old wooden clock chimed the hour. It was 3 a.m. They were the only patrons left. The candle's flame flickered rays of light onto her delicate face as she moved closer to him. Buvette Sherwood gazed into the deep blue eyes of this attractive, clean-shaven man, not knowing the danger that lay ahead. Huey Hewitt knew the danger, but still, he said nothing. She entranced him. Hiding the agony that was within him, Huey watched as she gently brushed the fiery auburn hair from her face. The movement formed a waterfall of brilliant color, sending ripples of light cascading through her long red hair. His infatuation increased. She sipped on her cherry Coke. An angel? Huey thought. I'm in the presence of an angel? The doorbell jingled, and a small man with a cigar stub in the corner of his mouth entered the bar. "Wanna yous guys call a cab?" he asked, wiping the moisture from his nose. "Yes, I did. I'll be with you in a moment," Buvette said, smiling politely. She turned toward the tall, distinguished man she was sitting with and said, "It was very nice to finally meet you, Mr. Hewitt." Although she had seen him many times before, it was only a few short hours ago that they had been properly introduced. "Your stories were simply delightful, and so was your company. I haven't laughed this much in years." "I enjoyed being with you as well, Miss Sherwood," he said, circling the rim of his glass with a slender finger. "Probably more than I should have." "What does that mean? Do you have a jealous wife?" "Oh, no," he replied. "I'm not married. It just probably isn't a good idea for us to see each other." He had the face of a small boy whose puppy was missing. "Why not?" she asked, perplexed by the sudden change in his demeanor. "It's probably not a good idea." He slurped down the rest of the Dewar's white label scotch he had been drinking. "Suit yourself," she said flippantly, as if she didn't care. Nonetheless, it was a very pleasant evening and, "Lady, I ain't got all night," said the cabbie. They rose from the table and moved toward the black enameled coat rack in the corner of the room. He helped her don her long mink coat and was aroused by the delicate scent of her perfume. She paused and turned to him, watching tenderly as his arms found the sleeves of his own slightly worn wool overcoat. She sensed something was wrong. "Why are you so sad all of a sudden? Was it something I said?" "Oh no, it's not you. It's me." "I'm sorry. I really had a wonderful time this evening," he said, smiling to cover his sadness. In a flash, he slipped past the cabbie and out the door. Huey's eyes revealed the hint of a painful hopelessness. He turned back toward her, hastily waved and said, "Good night." "Good night," she replied. In an instant, he was gone. She adjusted her coat and went over to the bar. Turning to Vincent Rayo, the bartender and owner of the restaurant, Boo said, "Your friend is mighty handsome, but he seems a bit melancholy. A kinder, more gentle person you could never hope to meet. We growed up together." Buvette could see Vincent's sincerity shine through his soft brown eyes. He had a thick set of distinctly Italian eyebrows. "Does he come in often?" "There ain't a day that goes by without me seeing my pal Huey." "Lady, I ain't got all night. You wants the cab or what?" said the cab driver, wondering how much more of his time this dizzy redhead was going to waste. "Yes, I do. Let's go. Good night, Vincent." "So long, Boo," said Vincent. Most of Buvette's friends called her Boo. In a moment, she was out the door, the cabbie trailing her. Boo's soft cheeks pinked in the frosty night air. She could feel the searing cold from the door handle penetrate through her leather gloves. She pulled open the door and got into the yellow cab. "Where to?" asked the cabbie. 737 Park Avenue, replied Boo. As they drove off, snow began to fall like a million tiny parachutes twirling at the whim of the breeze. Huey Hewitt tramped down the cold sidewalk, downcast, his thoughts haunted by the captivating redhead he had just left. The cold, blistering wind whipped snowflakes into his face, blinding him momentarily as he forged his way toward St. Paul's Catholic Church. He needed to pray. Oblivious to the cold and the murmur of crushing snow beneath his thin-soled shoes, his thoughts kept drifting to Boo. God, I need help, he thought. Alcohol usually calmed his passion for women, but tonight it had the opposite effect. He was wrestling with the desire that raged deep in his soul. He wanted her. He needed to feel her, to hold her, to taste her sweet essence, to savor her young, firm body on fire next to his, her precious lips pressed intimately against his own. These visions tormented him. Huey had never allowed himself to succumb to these urges. The yearning for female companionship sizzled unbearably deep inside him, setting his loins on fire. Alcohol had been his only escape, and now that was failing. He needed strength. He needed to pray. He stood in front of St. Paul's and watched the snow cover the high-pitched roof of the old church. In the distance, the mournful cry of a siren pierced the silence of the night. Holding back his tears, Huey wondered if he should go inside. He needed his God. He entered the house of worship. Huey paused briefly to dip his slim fingertips into the holy water. His light touch sent shallow ripples to the sides of the vessel ripples, like the pangs of agony he felt within him. He genuflected. Only the tapping sound of his heels could be heard as he made his way down the marble floor to a pew. Huey knelt down. He saw the statue of Jesus before him on the crucifix. He wept openly. "What's wrong, Father Hewitt?" An elderly, heavy-set woman wearing a black sweater walked up to him, a broom in her hand. "Oh, nothing, Mrs. Sullivan. I just had a very sad thought. It's gone now. I'm fine." "What are you doing here this time of night?" said Huey. "Now, Father Hewitt, you know perfectly well what I'm doing here. 'Tis nearly 5 a.m., and I have to sweep up the place before Father O'Brien's 6 o'clock mass," said Mrs. Sullivan, her Irish brogue tattling on her immigration many years before. "Oh, is it that late already? I seem to have lost track of the time." "Well, good night, Mrs. Sullivan. Good morning." With each word, he sent his alcoholic breath toward her. "Good day, Father," she said, twisting the broom handle. Through her wire-rimmed glasses, her eyes reprimanded him. Father Hewitt slid somewhat awkwardly through the brown door next to the hand-carved confessionals and disappeared into the confines of the rectory. He snuck quietly through the hallway, toward the craggy staircase that led up to his private quarters. Father O'Brien's bedroom was at the other end of this dark corridor. Huey stepped quickly but softly, hoping not to encounter him. He didn't want to have to explain himself again. Father Daniel O'Brien, an Irishman with a full head of white hair, looked much older than his 64 years. He was sitting in the rectory library, perched on his favorite overstuffed chair. With a flick from his liver-spotted finger, Father O'Brien thoughtfully turned the page of his sermon notes for the imminent 6 o'clock mass. He wetted the lead of his pencil with his tongue and jotted notes with penmanship, not unlike that of a physician. He heard a swoofed in the hall. It was the soft sound of Huey's light footsteps, muffled further by the oriental carpet on the floor. "Father Hewitt?" said Father O'Brien, rising to his feet. Huey froze in the open library doorway. "Heavens, Father Hewitt, you haven't been out all night drinking again, have you now?" said the old Irishman. He wasn't always this stern with his colleague and friend. Although Huey was in charge of the parish, he stood sheepishly before Father O'Brien, like a schoolboy caught dipping his little sister's ponytail into an inkwell. He said nothing. "I'll not be taking your place again like I did Sunday last, when you were in such a pitiful state from over-imbibin' the night before." The ire in his voice rose until he sensed the deep sorrow in his comrade. Then he said gently, "Don't you think you've been overdoing it a wee bit of late?" Still silence. "Well, Huey, I'm off to prepare for the mass then. Rest yourself. We'll talk of this tomorrow." He reached up to Huey's 6'3" frame and patted him on the shoulder. With his head hung low, Huey climbed to his bedroom apartment. The staircase creaked, as if wounded by the extra weight that tugged at Huey's soul. He entered his chambers. He went straight over to a cherrywood cabinet, opened it, and grabbed a half-empty bottle of Dewar's Scotch whiskey. With trembling hands, he poured a generous amount into a water-spotted glass. He slurped down the whiskey and quickly poured another, his hands less shaky now. As he undressed, he finished off the second glass and then fell into bed. The alcohol was doing its job. The turmoil inside him was succumbing to the numbing effect of the drink. His mind drifted to the strong smell of incense that had hung in the air the day he took his vows. He remembered how joyous he had felt kneeling before old Bishop Newhart, finally becoming a priest. It had been his boyhood dream. He knew he could never leave the priesthood. It was who he was and all he had ever known or wanted to be. But this secret yearning for companionship in recent years had grown painfully present in his thoughts. In the darkness and warmth of his bed, a tear glided from beneath his closed eyelid and down his cheek, soon swallowed up by his pillow. Boo was his last dreamy thought as he sank into a welcome state of unconsciousness.